Thank you again so much for joining eSub today. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may be. This is going to be part one of our summer legal series. The idea is we're trying to talk with some different thought leaders in the legal space, specifically the construction legal space, and bring some different ideas, some training, maybe stimulate some ideas of how you can look at that risk that's involved in the contracts that you sign. And this time, we're also going to dive a little bit into some technology. So this is part one with Josh Levy from Document Crunch. Josh, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Rob. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to have a good talk for the next little half hour, maybe a little bit longer, right? So for people that haven't met me, my name is Rob McKinney. I am the Director of Business Development for eSub. I'm also a podcast host for Power to the Trades. We'll talk about a little bit later. Been around the space for a couple of moons. I'm what we like to call a construction technologist. So I came out of the construction industry. I really like technology, and I've kind of made my way over on this side for a while. And I like to help, educate people about the use cases for technology and find other people to have really amazing conversations with. So with me today is somebody that I came across earlier this year. I've heard about a product, and then we ended up actually get to meet in Atlanta, and Josh is joining me today. So Josh, can you give people a little bit of background about yourself, the career that you had, and more importantly, what are you doing now with your company and the product Document Crunch?
Absolutely. So my name is Josh Levy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Document Crunch. My background is of a construction management major from the University of Florida. So studied kind of from my earliest times this industry, and made the decision after doing some big internships and some work assignments for some really large general contractors that I just didn't want to necessarily go the project management route. So I decided to go to law school, went to law school in my hometown of Miami, the University of Miami. So a bit of a conflict in my own head between the Florida Gators and the Miami Hurricanes. But anyway, I went to law school down at the University of Miami, the U, and practiced construction law in the city of Miami for several years. Worked for really what I would characterize as the preeminent construction law firm in the US, really, in terms of representing general contractors. So worked in the Miami office there. 6 years ago, I left private practice to go in-house for a large general contractor. I'm here in Atlanta now, and again, another national contractor. I had the privilege of working throughout the Southeast for that contractor. I had about 6 offices, I think, when I left, and the region of the contractor that I was running did about $1 billion a year in revenue. So an E&R top 20, 30 contractor. And then most recently, after doing that for 5 years, I went and led the advisory contracting function for a large EPC builder, an international builder with a large EPC business here in North America. I should say North and South America. So worked on large scale renewables projects, handled all the and industrial projects, a lot of EPC work, and just handled all the day-to-day contract negotiation, project claims. I ran the department. We had several lawyers in that group as well. And all of those experiences working kind of as a construction lawyer and executive, and getting to be a part of just billions upon billions of dollars of projects, negotiations, everything from condominiums in Miami to, solar, large scale utility grade solar and wind projects, throughout North and South America and everything in between, kind of collectively led me to understand this just massive problem that our industry has when it comes to understanding and managing risks in construction contracts and other project documents. That problem was eating away at me for a good chunk of my career. So about 2.5 years ago, I started to think about how technology could be leveraged to better allow the industry to understand this, which led to the founding of Document Crunch. Happy to talk more about it, but Document Crunch is really just the culmination of that journey. I'd like to talk about the problem that we're solving for even more than the company itself. And again, I'll just reiterate, I think that contractors of all sizes, I've represented them, negotiated with them, been across from them, fought with them, made up with them, whatever it is. Contractors of all sizes in this industry really struggle with understanding those risks in contracts and other project documents. And that struggle happens in two areas, Rob. That struggle happens in the back office, and that struggle also happens in the field with the people with hard hats on, because make no mistake about it, those people with hard hats on need to understand their contracts inside and out to run profitable projects. And in my, over a decade of experience, there's a direct correlation between successful project outcomes and project teams that get it. But more times than not, project teams just do not get it. So it kind of always stood out to me as a gold star when there was a project team that really understood the contract and really was pushing all the right buttons and running that project end to end super efficiently and gaining, managing changes and managing just all aspects of the project administration. And I believe that the technology that we have now can be leveraged to allow more project teams to do that. It doesn't need to be an anomaly anymore. There is the lowest barrier ever to understanding this stuff. And that's what this is all about. So I'll pause there and let you kind of ask away.
Man, that's an amazing background and pedigree to bring to this discussion today, honestly, because when we think about it, people in construction, let's just be honest, let's go ahead and bring it up. The legal side of this is not normally very fun. And I can say that with all due love and respect. I spent 14 years as a safety director. So you can imagine how popular I was back in the day when I would come on a job site. So safety wasn't popular. And talking about contracts, I remember so many times you're talking about the hard hats in the field. Well, they would always say, well, the contract's not my problem. That's what the project manager does. Whoa, wait a minute. Who's actually building these projects at the face of work? And Josh, some of what you're talking about, how many times are the hard hats, and we're talking about the superintendents, the foremen, the craft workers, how many times are they directed by the owner of a project completely out of scope, out of timeline, out of money discussions of, hey, could you just do fill in the blank, right? How many times has that little sentence led down a deep, dark path in your experience?
Well, you just reminded me of a great war story, and we actually haven't talked about this one yet. So this is me throwing you a bit of a curveball, but let me give you a perfect example of that in real time. And this goes back to my days in private practice. I had a client once who built a series of schools for a public school system, and all three schools were finished on time and within budget. All three schools were successful, profitable projects. It was a smashing success for the contractor, smashing success for the school board. A couple years after completion of those series of schools, we got a nice little letter from an auditor, the school board's auditor. And the school board's auditor had reached the conclusion that my client had improperly been paid over $2.5 million. $2.5 million on one project, one of those three. You can imagine that's quite a bit of money for a K through 12 school to be now being, 2 years later for a letter to come saying, refund us this money plus interest immediately. And the entire basis of that ask was as follows, Rob. We were doing work on an active school site. The principal of the school used to monitor construction pretty closely. And the principal of the school would come out to the project team and say, I know you're building this structure, but you're getting a little bit close to the kids' playground where we've got kindergartners and first graders. Do you mind rerouting the walkway out of safety considerations? And so changes like that every stakeholder at the school level directed and agreed to make. The auditor came to the conclusion that under the school system's procurement guidelines, which were embedded into the contract, any change order over, I think it was $25,000 or some minimum threshold, had to be approved by the school board. And the principal and staff had no authority to issue those changes. So you just came up with the perfect point. And by the way, it was really ugly. It got very public. There may have been some media that led, because it's the media that led with headlines that, contractor has improperly or insinuated that there was some kind of, foul play at issue. It was not just a legal issue, it was a real PR issue. And this was on a project that was completed successfully. And that the principal, stood up and said, yes, I asked them to do this. I didn't want construction and noise too close to the playground, or, whatever it was. So anyway, that's a perfect example of the field not necessarily having wherewithal. And it really came back to bite the contractor in the, what. And so that's right in line with, I think, what you were getting at there.
Oh man, that is painful. That is painful. Well, we're going to talk about 5 points over the next few minutes. And for people that are on with us now, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function. If it's something I think we'll need to pause Josh on, we'll, kind of cover it in the scope, or we'll just hold it till the end. Or if you just want to throw something in chat, either way, if something pops up that you're curious to ask more of Josh or myself, if we can answer it, we'll kind of handle it as we go forward. So first things we want to throw out there, Josh and I are talking about how to, quote, level this playing field. And he had some great examples that we talked about from other areas of the world and really in sports. And one of the quotes that Josh came up with that we wanted to kind of start this off with is, how do you know that the game of pickup football that you agreed to actually includes 5 downs instead of 4, like normal, right? And that's what I think we're talking about with that example from the school and some other ones of, does your team, as Josh was pointing out, the back office and in the field, really understand the rules of engagement that you're agreeing to on this project? Because if both sides do not, if one side does not, Josh, from what you've seen, sounds like there's always a bad outcome, correct?
Absolutely. So think about the back office in the field as follows. I think that back office is generally there to support, bidding and negotiating projects and making sure that, if something catastrophic happens, that the liability is in line, or that the insurance is in line, so that, things happen on construction and we all hope that they don't happen to us. But the reality is that, everyone on this phone, if you've been in the business for a while, has probably seen something bad happen. Whether there was some sort of a construction defect or a safety issue or a contract dispute, late delivery of a project. So, the back office needs to kind of help understand and smooth out what the consequences of those types of really bad things are. And I think, going back to my point, I think the industry really struggles with this because in a lot of cases, smaller to mid-cap contractors, they just don't have the in-house resources that really understand this. So what I've seen in my career is sometimes underqualified personnel are doing this. Sometimes you've got an executive who's been doing it for a long time, but he or she may have a lot of heartburn because they know that this stuff kind of keeps them up at night because it's hard. So that's kind of what I think of when I think of the back office support. I think of the field issues as follows, and this goes to the point that you're making, Rob. The field team is executing the project, and executing the project is like being on the football field. And so, yeah, if you were playing a game of football and the other side said, "Oh yeah, it's 5th down," how are you going to react to that in the field? That's not necessarily for the back office. That's for you in the field. And, Rob, you kind of separated project managers. I'll lump them into the field team because I think project managers by and large are out on site and, are out there in the trailer every day. How do you have the wherewithal to push back when whoever you're playing against says, yeah, it's 5th down. Like, we're just going to keep going because it's 5th down. Or are you able to say, well, hold on a second, you only get 4 downs. And that's just a very, that analogy is really what I think about. It's not so much the field team's responsibility to deal with what are the consequences if the building collapses, or what's the catastrophic consequences that you're managing against. Yes, you have to execute and hopefully those consequences don't come to be, but it's more, what do you do when it rains? Are you protecting yourself? What do you do when someone shows up late? What do you do when the cost of goods have gone up? What do you do when you encounter unforeseen conditions? What do you do when there's inconsistencies in the drawings? How efficiently are you managing the payment process? Are you getting lien waivers? Are you doing everything that you're supposed to be doing so that you protect the execution of the project from unnecessary, all those little dinks and dunks, which add up to fee erosion or costs that get sucked right out of the project? So let's pretend for a second that the audit of the project that I was talking about, let's pretend that it came back lily white and the contractor did nothing wrong. The contractor still had to endure the time and cost of dealing with that audit. And if that's your project, that could be even $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, whatever it is, that all those little things add up. Or you're not managing the payment process appropriately in terms of billings. So now you're getting pushback. And so now your accounts receivable is going on longer cycles than it needs to go on because or it rained 14 days on a project and you're not papering it necessarily the way you should be. So at the end of the project, you settle with the general contractor for 7 days or 8 days or 10 days, but you're not getting the full 14, which all adds up to time and money out of your pocket. So it's all those little things that I think are incredibly important when you think about project admin, and why this analogy I think makes a lot of sense. It's, again, it's just as simple as, I'm going to just, it's still our ball, it's fifth down. Well, that inherently makes no sense to anybody who understands the rules of football. How are you reacting when people are raising issues on your project? Whether you're a contractor dealing with an owner, whether you're a subcontractor dealing with a contractor or a sub, how are you reacting to those external circumstances? Are you taking full advantage of what you're entitled to, given what the rules of engagement are? And the rules of engagement in this case is the construction contract.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, let's dive in, and we're going to talk about 5 specific tips to get better for your contract review moving forward. And I've tried to find some imagery to kind of go along with what we're talking about. Now, the first one that you brought up when we were planning this, I had kind of heard about it, but I never really dove deep into it. But it's an interesting concept to think about when you get into a construction project, and it's notice of consequential damages. And you had a great example about a casino project, but it made me think about some other things too. So can you kind of lay this out there at the high level? We're talking about this notice of consequential damages. What would this potentially mean to a subcontractor on a construction project site?
So in most jurisdictions in the United States, we allow for, when someone breaches a contract somehow, we allow for 2 types of damages: direct damages and consequential damages. If I were, let's just use the picture that you gave, and then I'll give the casino example. That doesn't look good. It looks like somebody may have messed something up there. The direct damages, most of the jurisdictions from what we're looking at there, would be the actual cost to rebuild that appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
That's the direct damage. The consequential damage would be, let's say that was a toll road. And so because that happened, the tolls didn't collect revenue during the time that was down. That lost revenue is a consequential damage, which is allowed under a breach of contract if you don't waive the rights to consequential damages. So it's the business risk, the lost revenue, the lost business reputation, whatever it is, of the end user, that is totally allowed as a damage for breach of contract, unless it's waived in your contract. So going back to the scenario that that I mentioned when we were getting ready for this, I had a situation once where an electrical or a site work sub cut the line, an electrical line, when they were digging to a casino that was active. So again, the direct damage there would be you need to replace the wire. The indirect or consequential damage was we got a nice spreadsheet from the casino, which said, you took down my entire bank of slot machines for 4 hours. Here's all the revenue we lost based on our historical calculations. Generally speaking, the experts, risk managers in the construction industry do not believe that the small fees that we all get in this industry are inclusive of the risk of the end user's business. Because we don't really have insight into, that. We can't manage that.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of the casino, they likely have insurance to cover things like that. They likely have a backup plan. Like if these slot machines are down, we roll out the extra roulette tables and keep the customers, whatever it is. If you don't waive those damages, you're subject to them. So just think about that for a second and think about all the things that could go wrong. So another example, you don't install the windows right in a hotel. It rains, water gets into the hotel. The direct damages would be, water damage, cost to replace the carpet, cost to remediate all that, fix the window, all that. The indirect damage is the crown suite of the hotel couldn't be rented for 17 nights. And they would have charged an hourly rate or a nightly rate, I should say, of you have no idea what it is. It's, all of that downside damage is stuff that generally speaking, it's considered best practice to protect against as a as a contractor or subcontractor. But if you don't waive those, if you don't have a good waiver in your contract, you are surely subject to them.
Painful, very painful. All right, let's talk about number 2. This one I have had some experience with: liquidated damages, or LDs, as we like to say. And I remember coming up in the construction industry, I was part of a company that did a lot of DOT work where we would go and, take a bridge over and do rehabilitation over the weekend. So we would take over the bridge, at 10 p.m. on a Friday night, and it had to be open Monday morning at 6 a.m. or LDs would kick in, and in that case, it was definitely by the hour for Georgia DOT. And sometimes we didn't quite make it. It was pretty painful. What would a trade contractor really need to be looking out for now in 2021 about these liquidated damages, of how it could come back to haunt them?
Yeah, I mean, again, liquidated damages are kind of an exception to the consequential damages rule. So liquidated damages are, when the parties agree upfront to what those unknown damages are. Usually it's when it relates to delay. There's some other liquidated damages, performance as well. But generally speaking, in commercial construction, you see it in the context of delay. And again, having wherewithal around these issues are important. I mean, it's not uncommon to have liquidated damages as the agreed to amount or remedy for delay, but understanding whether those liquidated damages are reasonable, whether they're the sole and exclusive remedy for delay, or other delay damages could be, lumped on top of that, and whether they're manageable given the schedule and all of that and what milestones they're tied to. That's all really important when you're looking at a contract. So it's not to say, and by the way, is there any kind of a cap? Again, so the idea, you're in that back office, is liability capped, or are you just going, day for day with liquidated damages? And so all those things are important to consider when you're pricing, scheduling, and negotiating a contract, right? There's different ways to skin a cat. I'm not here to say that LDs are good or bad. It's very dependent on the situation, but having wherewithal around those types of issues is pretty important. So, consider a scenario where, if you were one day late, there was $1 million liquidated damage assessed. I mean, I've seen it. Maybe it's appropriate in some circumstances, maybe it's not, but we would want to know. I'd imagine anybody on this webinar would want to know if that was indeed, the case, right? Because it may change the way you think about how you would schedule the contract or how you would negotiate the contract. And in the case of subcontractors, to the extent that we have a lot of subcontractors on this phone call, oftentimes you need to really peer into the prime contract to understand what the liquidated damages framework would be. And so, I would pose this question, to the group, because it's another good, kind of talking point or follow-up for the group is, how often are you requesting to see that prime contract? Because more times than not, that prime contract is going to be incorporated by reference into your subcontract, and liquidated damages is one of the best examples of the types of things that kind of could flow down to a subcontractor who unknowingly signs a prime contract or a general contractor's contract that says, I agree to all delay damages to the extent that the owner assesses them against the contractor. Well, do you know what those are? Are you making sure that you're vetting that and that it's reasonable for you given your scope or the deal that you have or the way that you're being mobilized, et cetera? So those are some of the things to think about as well.
I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts. A lot of the experience I've had with liquidated damages generally came down to delays and work not being achieved on the guidelines per the schedule, per the contract. Do you think technology can help our trade contractor partners maybe better defend themselves in those cases where they were late for whatever reason? And it could have been another trade maybe held them up. It could have been weather, or to your point, the past year, materials has been kind of an issue in our industry, right? Of either A, you just can't get them, or they may have been delayed. I guess what I'm curious is there a way that technology can help a trade contractor document their actual history of a project to have them at least in a defensible position of when, if they do not meet a target milestone and LDs are trying to be applied, how do they best use technology to defend themselves?
Yeah, well, I think this maybe gets into a little bit of what you do, Rob, with ESUB. But I think the first starting point is, and this goes right to the discussion that we're having, is how realistic are you setting yourself up for success? Are you looking closely at those events which are considered excusable delays in your contract and making sure, that your knowledge of those issues is being practically woven into the deal that you cook? So I'll give you a perfect example. Like this was an area that I did not used to think about when I first started practicing. And then all of a sudden I started thinking about it. Tariffs, right?
Ooh.
You're doing lump sum pricing and you're guaranteeing the price of the project. At some point, I guess in the last 5 years, I started adding in a little exception to that guaranteed pricing, which was tariffs. So that was an example where my practical experience had informed the way I went into a negotiation. So to your point, like materials procurement right now is kind of a problem, right? How are you crafting your practical knowledge into the terms of the agreement that you're signing? So when you talk about can technology help to that, I mean, that is what Document Crunch is helping you do. It's helping you see where the critical issues are on your contract, and then allowing you the chance to have some context around those issues so that you can take a moment and say, oh, okay, here's the delay clause. I better, maybe the Suez Canal thing is worth lumping into an excusable delay. On the other hand, once things happen in the field, yeah, I mean, I would argue that a best practice for project admin is good documentation. And we can that's something that, that's a whole other topic for a whole other day. But I think that software like ESUB and others is also similarly available to help, create a clear and consistent record so that you are in a good position. But I'll tell you where people get into trouble. And again, going back to this example, when people get into trouble when there's no doubt that it rained 14 days and there's no doubt that you were delayed, but you didn't follow the contract, and the contract has some squirrely language in it that says, if you don't give timely notice, you waive the right to delays. That's when people get themselves in trouble. And so understanding how the terms of engagement apply to the realities of your situation is a really big deal. And yeah, I mean, that is where a technology like Document Crunch can help shed a lot of light.
Yeah, that's a very good nuance to bring up, because ESUB, we do that. We create photos and daily reports. We can document each and every day things that happen. And to your point, if it's rained 14 days in a row, and if it's an average of 2 to 3 inches every day, and you couldn't work, but you did not raise your hand, you didn't follow the contract and exercise your rights. Well, there is a part of ESUB too in the web-based platform that actually has these formal written letters that now, let's say you've had 7 consecutive days and you're on the trend, that you could bind up those reports as a PDF, send them over. But we also have, we call it the correspondence toolbox, which is form letters to do what you're talking about, of exercising your rights in that contract and raising your hand officially to say, hey, just want to let you know, by the way, it's rained 7 days in a row and we haven't been able to work for, it's raising your hand, but officially following the rules again that we're talking about, of you're trying to stay inside that 4th down and keep the ball moving ahead and not have an issue and have to debate about the 5th down. I think that's what I'm hearing, right?
Absolutely. And kind of similar to that workflow, I mean, Document Crunch's project team cheat sheets that we create. Again, when I think about back office versus front office, our comprehensive review tool will tell you all the catastrophic, types of issues you should be thinking about from a risk management, kind of like that, the essence of contract negotiation and understanding the risks and where those issues are. Those are the comprehensive reviews. The project team cheat sheet tool that we have is much more actionable for the project team. Like, here is how your excusable events of delay passage reads. Here's who you have to give notice to. Here's the prescribed form of notice. And by the way, you can customize it. So if you wanted to link to your form notice, it's right there in your workflow as you're looking at the contract.
Fascinating use case for that technology. Now let's talk about number 3, because we've been talking a lot about work. And specifically, when we're thinking about this, how do you better document the completion of your work? Technology, to me, is a great way to do that. But you and I are talking about some interesting things that maybe are not quite in the normal. And perhaps it could be something that, have you had all of your extra work order tickets or T&M tickets, however you like to phrase it, are they all signed and executed? Or you had some interesting use cases of hazardous materials manifest I'd like for you to kind of dive into.
Absolutely. So I agree with the proliferation of technology. I mean, project level documentation has never been easier. So there's all kinds of really cool startups and other technologies that aren't startups in the space right now that go to, documentation, punch list management, photographs, drones, all that. That's all well and good. But, again, like when we talk about the wherewithal of the field team, I mean, another war story is I've had situations where the federal government has opened up investigations of contractors that I've represented for violating the EPA, and why, that struck me as weird, and the reason why was I had folks in the field, superintendents, signing hazardous abatement manifests that were outside of our scope, but because they were on site, they were kind of serving as the owner's proxy or liaison. And they were signing these manifests just to help the owner out. And then they became the originator of the hazardous materials per the federal government. So you think about that, and again, having the wherewithal when an owner may say to you, hey, do you mind signing this? Having the wherewithal to say, our contract says that I'm not signing this. This isn't my responsibility. Or, yeah, if you want me to sign this, let's add the right clause into the contract that says, yes, we will sign this, but in no way are we signing this as the originator of these materials. So again, this is just like tying the rules of engagement to, in the case that I just gave, a superintendent just wanting to do their client a solid by helping manage some abatement work that was being done by others. Not even manage it, just, help facilitate the manifest signing.
That by others will get you every time. The story you're telling reminded me of being on a power plant in West Georgia a long time ago, and the grading contractor digging out and building their fuel containment area. Well, said fuel containment area wasn't built properly to the specifications. Long story short, the fuel seeped into the ground soil, which got into the water table and got into a federally protected waterway. So I definitely feel your pain on the EPA, because I've dealt with the EPA and with OSHA. I found that OSHA negotiated. I can tell you firsthand, the EPA does not negotiate. And that contract really came back to hurt us in that case.
Well, and I'll tell you, and again, this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the webinar today. So in the case that I was telling you about, we were able to sort it out. It didn't end up being a huge deal, but it still costs time, money, and in my case, having to find a special attorney for one very low price of probably $700-800 an hour to help navigate, the regulatory framework that we found ourselves kind of, ensconced in. And to that point, it was avoidable by simple wherewithal, which was, our contract says that we're not touching this. Like, I appreciate that you want me to sign for this, but the answer is I shouldn't be doing that. That would have saved us a lot of, certainly for me, a couple of sleepless nights, and the people involved as well. And real monies that, again, by the way, it wasn't $1 million loss, but tens of thousands of dollars across projects add up. They add up, and that's what this is really about.
I hear you, man. Well, let's talk about number 4, because we're really going to dive straight in now and talk about the contract itself. And you were talking about the differences in using the documentation from the field, but understanding also in that back office, the conflicts. Specifically, we're talking about when the trade contractor signs their subcontract with the general contractor, but also understanding what is in your contract versus that prime contract between the GC and the owner. What are some of those other big pitfalls to really think about? We're talking about the contract. It's not necessarily just your subcontract agreement to a general. It's also to the owner, right?
Yeah, and I mentioned that earlier as well. So liquidated damages was a great example. But yeah, there's all kinds of mandatory subcontract flowdowns in prime contracts. And I would, again, challenge this group. I think someone raised their hand. I don't know if they typed in a question or not, But I would challenge this group to ask yourselves, I mean, how, if you're a subcontractor, I always say you have the short end of the stick because you have a 2-for-1. There's 2 contracts that govern you: the contract between the owner and the GC, and then your subcontract with the GC. So, to that end, having a clear picture on the overall risk profile of the deal and all of the various issues that may impact you, liquidated damages being one of them, what's allowed to be billed for, or what the requirements are for subcontractor billing, which sometimes could be in the prime contract, audit rights of the owner, whatever it is. Those are all things to think about. The warranty period, whether the contractor is exposed to consequential damages against the owner, because does that mean that the contractor gets, even though it's not the contractor's consequential damages, do they get to make an indemnification claim? So the owner suffers all this lost revenue. It's not the contractor's lost revenue that they're making a claim for. It's the fact that you caused the owner lost revenue and they're exposed under the prime. So those are all of the types of things that you need to have wherewithal around if you're going to, really level up your ability to manage the risk in your projects.
I agree 100%. I'm thinking as we're talking about this, there's a way to actually use the best of both worlds approach, right? If somebody on this webinar is listening, they use your solution, Document Crunch, to actually crunch the document, the legal contract, and find all those issues to be mindful of. Well, if you can output that as a PDF, then why not put that in eSub or your project management platform of choice, to where the office team and the field team all have now this reviewed contract, and have it easily accessible to review at any time, any place, anywhere. That's one of the back end features I like of eSub, is our cloud storage capabilities, to share documents between team members, and not just the blank PDF of the contract or even a highlighted one by a human, but the output from your platform that can be shared with team members anytime, anywhere. Read on your smartphone, read on your tablet. That's got to be a good way to again, level up your legal game, right?
Absolutely. So if you wanted to stay totally interactive online, I mean, that functionality also exists on Document Crunch. You can share documents in the platform and have an interactive, collaborative team access or project access to a file. So anybody from the field, laborers all the way up to the senior VP of operations could be looking and having the same kind of set of cliff notes in and around the contract. But then to Rob's point, I mean, we recognize that, Document Crunch is not a document repository. It's not a project dashboard. There's other platforms like eSub and others out there, and the ability to take that offline is similarly there for our users. So whatever is best for you, we can facilitate and accommodate either approach with our tools.
I like that. Well, let's talk about number 5 real quick, because this is one we talked about. It's definitely one of those parts when we talk about a legal contract that's very interesting, but I'm a little fuzzy on. Let's talk about entitlements, and really, what does the trade contractor need to focus on in regards to entitlements for them, to their benefit?
Yeah, so I think this is a really good, catchphrase, entitlements, which really, kind of wraps its arms around everything that we've been talking about. I mean, at the end of the day, I always say that money is going to move around on projects. It's going to go from somebody's bucket into somebody else's bucket. It's just going to happen because construction is dynamic. And we talked a lot about some of these factors, but external factors consistently change the time for performance, the cost for performance, et cetera. So when you think about that, I like to say that the best run projects are the projects that protect their bucket, unless of course they owe money, and then they should let it go from their bucket. But what you don't want is, you don't want to let money seep out of your bucket if you were not, if the rules did not mandate that money seep out of your bucket. Mm-hmm. So going back to like that rain example I gave, are you getting 100% entitlement when you have inclement weather that delays your performance? Or are you a little bit wishy-washy about it because, your team is kind of a little bit laissez-faire and knows that it will settle up at the end of the project, and, now you've got retention hanging over you, so you settle up for a little bit less than maybe what you would have gotten if you would have nipped it in the butt right there when, at the project level. So, protecting your rights under the contract is incredibly important, and protecting your bucket is incredibly important. because again, it's not so much the catastrophic outcomes that I think are the most insidious part of our industry. I think the most insidious part of our industry is those little death by 1,000 cuts that add up to so much fee erosion. We're all operating on slim margins as an industry, and you can't afford to lose a few basis points on your profit margin simply because you lack wherewithal at the project level for things that you're entitled to. So when I think of entitlements, that's what I'm thinking about.
Man, that's very enlightening. I appreciate you diving a little bit deeper on that one. Well, the last thing we're going to talk about is we've talked a little bit about technology, but let's really dive specifically in to the software that you've created. Let's talk about what Document Crunch does for that trade contractor to really, let's say at the highest level, I think it's demystifying the contract. It's making the quote unreadable, readable. Josh, can you walk us through a little bit? We have a few screenshots at the 50,000 foot level. What is it that Document Crunch does for that trade contractor?
So Document Crunch does two things amazingly well, and I think this should be pretty simple and intuitive. So Document Crunch, the first thing we do is we've taken machine learning and artificial intelligence in particular and created algorithms around all the issues that myself and my co-founder, who's also a very high level construction practitioner, he's got a few years even on me, and he's the managing partner of one of the preeminent construction firms in the country. What we would have looked for if we were reviewing your contract or other documents. So in the case of the comprehensive review tool that I was telling you, we'll highlight 45 issues. I mean, almost instantaneously. If you uploaded a 50-page construction contract, in probably 2 to 3 minutes, it would come tagged and highlighted for all 45 of the issues that we would have looked for if we were reviewing the contract. Does that mean that it's every issue? Do we look, if peanut butter and jelly, if any prohibition on peanut butter and jelly was important to you for some reason, are we going to find that? No, because we can't find every issue universally, but those 45 issues that we look for are a really good starting point for the types of issues that are universally recognized as important, not just legal issues, but business issues, risk management issues, execution issues, et cetera. So we find those issues in a fraction of the time and at a fraction of the cost as if you were doing it yourself or using other resources to do this. The second thing that we do is not just find those issues and highlight them, but we explain and contextualize those issues. So we're not going to tell you, this issue is good, this issue is bad, you should sign this, you shouldn't sign this, you should negotiate this, you shouldn't. We're not going to tell you that. But we are going to tell you, here's the issue that we found, and we're going to give you relevant considerations that you should think about when confronting that issue. Some practice pointers, if you will, some industry standard or acceptable language. And all of that can all be customized. So maybe, as smart as my mom would tell you that I am, maybe what I think isn't as important to you as what your organization thinks, or maybe you have a good playbook with regard to risk management. But imagine a scenario where now, your folks who maybe aren't as sophisticated as maybe some of the other folks in the organization now have the ability to say, okay, this is the contingency provision in the contract. Here's why it's important to my company. I can't sign this particular clause unless Rob approves, or, Rob's my esteemed, all-knowing lawyer or executive. Here's Rob's preferred approach to this provision type. So if you're negotiating a contract, please put in Rob's preferred provision. Whatever it is, it can be totally customized. So by finding the issues and contextualizing the issues, those are the two things that we do. We believe that we allow trade partners to really level up. And then in the case of the project team cheat sheet, again, just distilling down, we don't look for 45 issues and all the legal risk management issues. We look for all the execution issues. And by distilling those down in a very simple format, if you are delayed on a project, click here to understand your rights, right? When encountering hazardous materials, click here to understand your rights. And then to have the explanations as well, we think that we allow the entire industry to totally level up and really own successful outcomes at the project level or in the back office if you were negotiating or bidding or doing risk reviews. So, whether you're a back office person or you're in the field, this allows you to just do a lot more with a lot less, and to demystify something which otherwise, I think, at least in my experience, drives our industry totally nuts, which is why guys like me have had such good careers as construction practitioners, because our builders want to build. They don't want to be bogged down with all this fine print. but I believe that they're either missing a lot of what's important or they're overspending on understanding this fine print. And so whether you're an overspender or an underinvestor, I think this tool is incredibly powerful by just simply, again, identifying the issues and telling you why they're important.
And it's a fascinating application of technology without a doubt, man. Thank you for bringing this to the market. So with that, we have been talking about a lot of concepts, a lot of ideas, and we have some time left. And we wanted to provide that opportunity. Does anyone have a question for Josh about the contract tips that he's kind of put out there, maybe the product that he's showing? Do you have a question about ESUB that I can answer? If you want, please put something in the Q&A now, and I can take a look at that, and we can kind of go through those. If you want to put it in the chat, either way, got a little bit of time left. Josh and I both would love to answer any questions or throw out some more guidance if we can. See if anybody has one there. And I'll go ahead and while we're waiting for those questions, thank you for your attendance today. Appreciate you spending some time with us. We hope that you found these insights valuable. Hope you level up your company's game when we're talking about this legal sense. And the other thing we'll put on there, and Josh, maybe you can explain this a little bit, is for those of you that have joined us today, we have a little offer. Josh, would you like to explain what that offer is for everyone?
Sure. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to make the attendees have access to one free upload so you can test out our platform. Just to put things in perspective, an upload, if you just bought one off the streets, would be a $300 value. So it's a pretty high value offer for anyone here. So one free upload, no strings attached. All you need to do is email info@documentcrunch.com with the subject line eSubCrunch. If you do that, we'll get you set up with a free upload so you can try this tool out for yourselves. And we'll just ask that you do that in the next 24 hours. And anybody who does that, we're happy to extend that $300 offer to. So please take advantage of it. And we're excited for you to give it a try.
That is an awesome offer. Josh, we do have one question. This comes from Jasmine, and she was curious, what is the cost for Document Crunch? And I think you have kind of a tiered approach, correct?
That's right. It's a great question. So we're a quasi subscription, quasi usage based model. So Jasmine, there's varying costs depending on how big of a user you are. The price per upload goes down the more uploads you purchase. So if you go on our website at www.documentcrunch.com, all the pricing information is actually up there. So it's pretty transparent. And we think that, again, you think about one crunch being $300, you upload a 100-page construction contract up there, you start to think about what the cost of external resources look like. And even if this saved, just 1 or 2 hours, it more than pays for itself, let alone some of the potential catches that it makes, which could end up, costing, a lot more than a few $100. So anyway, that's how our pricing works.
All right. Does anybody else have a question out there? Something about the 5 tips that we talked about? Anything about ESUB, how we can help you out? Anything more about Document Crunch while we have a little bit of time left? All right, we'll let people keep thinking a little bit. I got a couple other things that we're going to throw out there and keep talking about. Now, one thing, if you're curious to learn more about Josh and his background, we actually have recently done a full interview. He was the guest on episode 20. So if you want to go back, you can look at esub.com. We have a whole page for the podcast. You can listen to it there. You can also follow this link. You can use a bit.ly link and look for it. It's bit.ly/PTT20LEVY. You can listen to his background and some of the topics we talked about there, give you a little bit more information. Then if you're curious and you want to reach out to Josh, this is his contact information. Josh, I didn't put your phone number up because I wasn't totally sure, but I figured if we just use the email, people can definitely find you that way, unless you want to share that phone number with them now.
Yeah, I think email is usually probably the best way to get a hold of me. If anybody wants to give me a ring, that's fine. 305-321-3206, 305-321-3206. But connecting with me either at email or on LinkedIn or whatever is usually a pretty effective way to do so.
There you go. And I'll also put up my contact information. If you're curious to talk to me about anything ESUB related, you can reach out to me at rob.mckinney@esub.com, or you can give me a call, 404-640-2549. And we got one question that came in. Let me see if I can read through this one and read it back to you, Josh. This comes from David. Had an issue once where an architect messed up the flooring tags and we ordered $10,000 worth of corrected materials and promised by the GC the change order for the full cost. I think I already know where this story's going. After the job was done, the client declined to pay because of the failure to provide a mock-up or submittals, but neither requirement process was mentioned by our sub GC contract. What's the best way to handle a situation like this, Josh?
Well, the first thing I think of, David, when I see that question is, what did the prime contract say? And so when you say this wasn't mentioned by your subcontract, the question really is, well, was the prime contract incorporated into the subcontract? And did the prime contract say that? And that goes back to what, I was getting at. I mean, how often are you familiarizing yourself with the prime contract? If you truly believe that that you were entitled, even given the terms of the contract, then I think there's certainly rights and remedies that are available to you. And full disclosure, I'm not giving you particular legal advice. It's pretty fact specific. But I would say finding a good advisor that could help you navigate, what some remedies for you would be if you truly have a good claim. That's important. I think, again, the Venus flytrap that I oftentimes see people get into is, the situation you just gave on its face sounds great, but if the prime contract clearly stipulated that the mock-up and submittals be submitted before the owner is obligated to pay, then you may be in a little bit of a pickle. And so oftentimes you see subcontractors or others that lead with like, well, we're entitled to this because it just seems fair. Well, that's a good story, but the contract is what's really going to be enforced and stood upon. And just like I was talking about the buckets earlier, you better believe that an owner is not going to let money seep out of their bucket unless they're mandated that money seep out of their bucket. So you want to make sure that you have the right to take that money out of their bucket, and that right is going to exist in your contract.
That makes me think of something that we used to do. So I came from the general contractor side of the table, and one of the programs that we put in place, we actually got from the Army Corps of Engineers. So every project that we completed, we always had to have what we called a preparatory meeting. And that was where we, as the GC, sat down with every trade partner, and it was project manager and project manager. It was superintendent and superintendent. And I was normally there as the quality control rep, as we literally sat down and went through what Josh has been talking about. We went through the contract, the subcontract in great detail. And one of the things we always talked about specifically when it came to a lot of the finishes, we talked about windows, flooring, the roof, lots of different elements, is we always would go through what are the requirements for the mock-up, submittals, what are the requirements for, do they want to see samples? And that was one of the things that we implemented. Granted, it was from the GC side of the table, but it may be something for all the trade contractors to think about is every deal that you're getting to going forward, how can your project team that you've assigned, your project manager, your foreman, your superintendent, how do they sit down first internally and understand the deal, but then go to the project and have that same meeting, reverse the course, right? Request from the subcontractor side of the table to meet with a general contractor rep and ask and get all those things documented, or at least have it where it's documented that you asked, do you need to see a mock-up? Do you need to approve and see samples of material? All your questions, get that out way up front and at least kind of have a marker. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, what you're outlining, Rob, is certainly best practice. And what you're hearing, what you're really circling around is this idea. And I think we kind of led with this theme, this alignment between back office and the project, and then this alignment at the project level of what's right is right, what's fair is fair. We're going to honor what we're entitled to. We're going to stand firm when we're entitled to take money from your bucket, but we're also not going to make misguided claims if we're not entitled to money from your bucket. And all of that wherewithal, all of that accountability, all of that knowledge, what that adds up to is less transaction costs, because everybody is working with a high degree of accountability and knowledge, and that all adds up to smoother outcomes. So this isn't just about, and my philosophy has never just been about just take everything you can take. My philosophy is about you should stand up for what's due and owing to you when it's right to do so. And you should admit and or give back when you're not entitled or somebody else is entitled. And I think that if that starts with having a very good understanding that there's only 4 downs in football, not 5. You don't insist that there's 5 downs if there's not. You don't let somebody else insist to you that there's 5 downs if there's not. You understand that there's 4 downs. And so when your 4 downs are up, you give the ball to the other team. When the other team insists that they're going to take a 5th down, you have every right and you should be, holding them accountable to the game only has 4 downs. That's what this is about. And so that alignment is really important.
I hear you. Well, last opportunity. Does anybody have any final questions for Josh or myself? We put it out there one last time. See if anything comes in, Josh. All right. Well, Josh, thank you again so much for your time, expertise today, and also that special offer for Document Crunch. Really appreciate your time and guidance, and we look forward to maybe doing some more content in the future with you, sir.
Absolutely, Rob. It's been a real pleasure. I think you do a great job with all of this stuff, and I appreciate the attendees for coming out today and showing some curiosity around some of what we're doing and some of the why behind it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for everyone for joining us today. And just to remind you, we're always here for our subcontractor partners. And if you're curious to learn more about us, we are one of the only 100% trade contractor focused project management tool out there. There's a lot that we can offer you, a lot of different things that our sales team could kind of show you. So if you're curious to learn more, just go to esub.com, take a look at what you see. If you're curious, you would like to schedule a private demo for what we can do for you, we'd love to have that opportunity. And with that, we'll wrap this as part 1 of our legal series, and we'll be starting some new things up later in the month and then also in July. So thank you for your time this afternoon or morning, and stay healthy, stay well. Josh, I'll see you again soon, man.
Talk soon, Rob. Take care.